Part 1. The Birth of a Strategist. Shadows of Ancient China, in the mists of ancient China. During the late spring and autumn period, war was not an exception, it was the rhythm of life. Kingdoms rose and fell like the tides, and the land was soaked with ambition, fear, and blood. Among these fractured states, the kingdom of Wu was small but hungry for power, and within its heart, a boy named Sun Tzu was born. The man who would one day change the way the world understood war. His birth was not recorded in royal scrolls. He was not of noble blood. But destiny, it seemed, had chosen him to be the voice of strategy, not through sword, but through mind. From his earliest days, Sun Tzu was a silent observer. He watched the powerful quarrel and the weak suffer. He saw how pride destroyed kings faster than any blade. His father, a minor scholar, taught him the way of balance, that wisdom, not weapons, wins wars. Know yourself, his father once told him, and you will never be conquered. The words would echo through Sun Tzu's life, forming the seed of his eternal philosophy. As he grew, China itself was transforming. The Zhou dynasty's power waned, leaving countless feudal states fighting for dominance. Each ruler claimed divine right, but none held true control. Villages burned. Armies marched endlessly, famiglie se freddo. The world was chaos, the perfect classroom for a mind born to bring order. Sun Tzu's youth was steeped in study, philosophy, warfare, nature, and human behavior. He was fascinated by how a single decision could alter the course of history. He read about past generals and their failures, dissecting their errors as if they were puzzles to be solved. By the time he was a young man, he understood what most rulers never would, that war was not just fought on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of men. He began to write, not for fame, but to preserve what he had seen. His scrolls were filled with observations on deception, discipline, and timing. To win without fighting, he wrote, is the supreme art of war. Those words alone would later make him immortal. But before wisdom came recognition, he would need a stage, a war to test his philosophy. In those years, the kingdom of Wu faced constant threats from the stronger state of its king. Hilu was desperate for a mind that could outthink brute strength. Sun Tzu's writings reached him through whispers in the court, tales of a man whose mind could turn defeat into victory. Hilu summoned him. The court was filled with laughter when the scholar arrived, a man with calm eyes and unshaken poise, unarmed, dressed simply. You claim to understand war? The king mocked. Not claim, my lord, Sun Tzu replied softly. I understand men. And war is nothing but men acting upon fear. The court fell silent. Hilu, amused and intrigued, decided to test him. If you are so wise, he said, train my concubines to become soldiers. The room burst into laughter. Sun Tzu only bowed. As you command. The king's favorite women were gathered, silken, perfumed, adorned with jewels. They giggled and whispered, mocking the strange man before them. Sun Tzu addressed them calmly. If orders are not clear, it is the fault of the commander. But once clear and not obeyed, it is the fault of the soldiers. He divided them into two groups and appointed two of the king's favorites as captains. When you hear the drum, he said, turn right. The drum beat. They laughed. Sun Tzu smiled faintly. If the orders are clear and still not followed, the fault lies with the captains. He ordered their execution. The court gasped. The king protested. They are my favorites. Your Majesty, Sun Tzu said, when a general is appointed, he serves the command, not the pleasure of the king. Reluctantly, Hilu agreed. The captains were executed. When the drum sounded again, not a single woman moved out of place. Precision, discipline, obedience. The demonstration was complete. The king was speechless. Sun Tzu bowed. Now, the army is ready. Would you like them to march against your enemies? From that day, he became the general of Wu. Under his command, the kingdom would rise from obscurity to dominance. Yet his teachings were never about conquest alone. They were about harmony in conflict. The wise warrior, he wrote, avoids the battle. To him, Every sword drawn was a failure of foresight. War, he believed, was like water. It flowed to the path of least resistance. A general's duty was to understand that flow, not to fight it. He spent long nights studying the terrain, the weather, the minds of his enemies. Sun Tzu. Even silence was a weapon. He learned to hide strength behind weakness and victory behind patience. The soldiers of Wu revered him, for he treated them not as tools, but as sons. "Regard your soldiers as children," he wrote, "and they will follow you into the deepest valleys." His leadership was not based on fear, but respect. He led with calm precision, never shouting, never boasting. When asked why he never celebrated victories, he answered, "Because victory is the funeral of many." His campaigns were swift and calculated. When he fought, he struck like thunder, unseen until too late. And when he didn't, the enemy destroyed themselves trying to find him. His philosophy spread like wildfire across the states of China. Scholars copied his scrolls by hand, passing them from one province to another. Some called him a sage. Others called him a sorcerer. But none could deny that he understood something others did not: the human heart in battle. His writings were collected, refined, entitled The Art of War. It was more than a manual. It was a mirror of human nature. "If you know the enemy and know yourself," he wrote, "you need not fear the result of 100 battles." The king of Wu, now his greatest admirer, trusted him with the fate of the realm. But Sun Tzu remained humble, untouched by pride or greed. He once said, "A leader who seeks glory will find ruin. A leader who seeks peace will find victory." As his name spread, so did the envy of other generals. Some whispered that he used witchcraft. Others feared he could see the future. Yet Sun Tzu paid no heed. His only concern was balance victory without chaos. His strategies turned the tide of countless battles without shedding unnecessary blood. He made kings reconsider the very purpose of war itself. But Sun Tzu knew that power always invited corruption. The greater his success, the more dangerous the court became. He had mastered the art of war, but could he master the politics of peace? His greatest tests were yet to come. Part 2. The Art of War. Wisdom from the Battlefield. The Appointment of Sun. Tzu, as general of the Kingdom of Wu, marked the beginning of a transformation unlike any the region had seen before. While other states relied on brute strength, he forged an army that was sharper than any blade, disciplined, intelligent, and deadly precise. Sun Tzu understood that an army's power was not measured by its size, but by its mind. He spent long nights training the soldiers to think, not just to fight. In his eyes, war was a conversation between two minds, not merely a clash of swords. The king granted him authority to reshape the military, and he began to rebuild it from the ground up. He divided the army into units, each trained to operate independently yet flow together like water. An army, he wrote, must be like water, formless and adaptable. His soldiers learned to listen to the rhythm of the drum and the wind, to strike when least expected. Sun Tzu believed that the greatest victory was the one won without blood. To subdue the enemy without fighting, he taught them, is the supreme art of war. Scouts were trained not just to observe, but to understand, to see what others overlooked. Every shadow, every bird in the sky, every silent movement could reveal the enemy's heart. His methods were unlike anything the warriors of Wu had seen. Gone were the days of loud charges and clashing shields. Instead came silence, movement like mist, and strikes as sudden as thunder. Soon, word of his methods reached beyond the borders of Wu. Other states grew uneasy, sensing that a new kind of warfare had been born. Sun Tzu took his army to the borderlands, where Wu's enemies gathered their forces. Among them, the powerful state of Chu, eager to crush the upstart kingdom. Their army was massive, their generals confident, their king laughing at the idea of a scholar leading soldiers. But Sun Tzu did not flinch. He studied their formation from afar, as a hawk studies its prey. He noticed their arrogance, the way they moved slowly, believing no one dared strike first. And that was their weakness. One night, under the cover of fog, he sent a small unit through a hidden path. The Chu army slept, certain of their safety. But when dawn broke, they found their supply lines burned and their watchtowers empty. Panic rippled through the camp. 1,000 soldiers fled before a single sword was drawn. Sun Tzu had not attacked their soldiers, he had attacked their certainty. He turned their confidence into fear, and fear into chaos. By the time his main forces appeared on the horizon, the Siachu army was already defeated in spirit. Their general demanded a duel, expecting Sun Tzu to lead from the front, but Sun Tzu refused. "I do not fight for honor," he said. "I fight for victory!" He ordered the encirclement instead. The Siachu army, demoralized and disoriented, collapsed before the battle truly began. Wu's soldiers captured the field with minimal bloodshed. The king of Wu celebrated, but Sun Tzu remained calm. "Victory is not to be celebrated," he told his officers. "It is to be understood." After each battle, he gathered his commanders not to boast, but to reflect. Every mistake was dissected, every movement analyzed, every outcome recorded. His soldiers learned that war was not chaos, it was a science. He began to write down these lessons in greater detail. Each line was a blade, each word a tactic, each page a new way to wage war. He wrote, "Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected." He taught that deception was not weakness, but mastery. "All warfare," he wrote, "is based on deception. The enemy must never know where you are, strongest or weakest. A hidden strength is 10 times greater than a visible one." Sun Tzu trained his men to blend with the landscape, to vanish like wind and strike like lightning. They became ghosts of the battlefield. When other kingdoms heard of these victories, some sought alliances, others prepared for war, but all feared the name of Sun Tzu. He did not just win battles, he changed how they were fought. His generals soon realized that the enemy often destroyed itself. He once told them, "The wise warrior lets his enemy march toward his own ruin." He planted seeds of doubt, and doubt became their greatest weapon. Villages under Wu's protection began to flourish as conflicts ended swiftly and efficiently. People began to see Sun Tzu not as a warlord, but as a bringer of stability. Yet he knew power was fragile, like glass, strong until cracked. Rivals within Wu began whispering that he held too much influence. The king trusted him, Batto Kochi, Eguru Yuneji. Some feared that his brilliance could turn against the throne itself. But Sun Tzu had no thirst for the crown. His war was with ignorance, not rulers. He continued, refining his philosophies. "In the midst of chaos," he wrote, "there is also opportunity." He drilled his commanders in the art of adaptation. Every plan could change in a breath. "The best plan," he told them, "is the one that bends without breaking." Wu's army became unpredictable, and that unpredictability was its sharpest weapon. While other generals followed traditions, Sun Tzu invented new paths. He turned rivers into traps, forests into allies, silence into terror. He knew the enemy feared what it could not see, and so he became invisible. Rumors spread that Sun Tzu could control the wind, that he appeared where no road existed. In truth, it was discipline, timing, and patience, nothing supernatural, only genius. His enemies learned to respect his shadow long before they faced his army. "When the enemy is relaxed, make them toil," he wrote. "When full, starve them. When settled, make them move." Wu's victories multiplied, and its enemies began to crumble. The king of Wu grew more ambitious, dreaming of uniting all of China under his banner. Sun Tzu remained calm, warning him of overreach. "The greatest victory," he said, "is one that does not require another." But kings rarely listen to caution when the world bows to them. Whispers of greater wars filled the court. For Sun Tzu, this was not triumph, but the beginning of a dangerous path. The art of war was meant to end war, not fuel it. He looked to the horizon, knowing that the lessons he had forged might soon be tested beyond anything he had imagined. And so, the strategist prepared not just for battles, but for the storm of ambition itself. Part 3. The Emperor's General. Triumphs and tests as the kingdom of Wu expanded. The name of Sun Tzu spread far beyond its borders. In distant courts and royal halls, rulers whispered of the general who conquered without fighting. To his soldiers, he was a teacher. To his enemies, a shadow. To the king, a weapon of unimaginable power. But power, Sun Tzu knew, was never without a price. The king's ambition began to grow faster than the land itself. He looked beyond defending Wu. He dreamed of ruling all of China. Sun Tzu warned him with quiet words. A ruler who overreaches invites his own ruin. But ambition does not listen to caution. It listens only to applause. The court praised the king's victories, forgetting they were born not from size, but strategy. Envoys arrived from neighboring states, their eyes full of fear and calculation. Some offered alliances. Others prepared armies in secret. The state of Siku, humiliated by past defeats, vowed to crush Wu once and for all. Their forces were vast, their resources endless, their hatred deep. Sun Tzu studied their movements like a scholar studies the stars. He knew their pride would be their undoing once again. But this time, CHU's campaign was different. Larger, more coordinated, more dangerous. They had learned from their previous mistakes. Their generals mirrored Sun Tzu's strategies, trying to use his own lessons against him. But no mirror can reflect the mind of the original. Sun Tzu understood not just what they would do, but why they would do it. He spent sleepless nights preparing not just an army, but a storm. He selected terrain carefully. Marshlands, rivers, hidden valleys. Terrain decides victory before swords are drawn, he told his commanders. The CHU army marched proudly, unaware that every step they took was on ground chosen by their enemy. Scouts from Wu returned with detailed reports, each word like a chess piece placed on a board. Sun Tzu gathered his generals around a map drawn in sand. He drew lines with his hand, moving stones to show where the enemy would falter. They believe they are hunting us, he said softly, but it is they who walk into our jaws. His commanders nodded, their trust in him unshaken. At dawn, the fog rolled over the valleys like a living thing. The CHU army advanced, banners high, drums beating loudly. But the sound they heard was not their drums. It was silence. The Wu army was nowhere to be seen. Sun Tzu's forces were hidden in layers, woven into the land itself. When the first division of Siku crossed the marsh, the ground beneath them shifted. Not traps of wood or steel, traps of timing. The water level rose suddenly, redirected by hidden channels Sun Tzu's men had dug weeks before. Their cavalry sank into the mud, their formation broken like glass. Then came the whispers, arrows from unseen angles, strikes from fog. The CHU army panicked, unable to see their enemy. Sun Tzu had once written, "When you are invisible, you become the fear itself." His forces struck like wind, unseen everywhere and unstoppable. The CHU generals tried to regroup, but their signals were lost in the chaos. Within hours, their numerical advantage became meaningless. By nightfall, they fled, leaving behind their banners, their pride, and their dead. Wu's victory was total, and Sun Tzu's legend grew even darker in the eyes of his enemies. But for him, it was not glory that mattered. It was the principle. The skillful fighter, he wrote, puts himself beyond the possibility of defeat, and waits for the enemy to offer himself to defeat. The king of Wu was drunk with triumph. He began to speak of conquering Siku entirely. With you, he told Sun Tzu, we could rule everything. But Sun Tzu's face remained still, his voice calm. The more you grasp, he said, the more slips through your fingers. Yet the court cheered the king's words, not the general's wisdom. Ministers plotted expansion, nobles counted riches they did not yet have. Ambition became fever. Sun Tzu continued to strengthen the army, not for conquest, but for balance. He refined formations, trained new generals, and expanded his doctrine. His officers memorized his maxims like sacred texts. Speed is the essence of war, he told them. Take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness. His brilliance was no longer a rumor. It was a force of nature. But power brings envy. Courtiers began to fear his influence. Whispers spread that Sun Tzu held the army's loyalty more than the king himself. A man who can command an army, they said, can also command a throne. The king trusted him, but even trust has shadows. One night, as war drums echoed in the distance, a messenger arrived from a border fortress. A coalition of enemy states was forming, not one, but 3 kingdoms joining forces to crush Wu. It was the greatest threat they had ever faced. The court panicked, nobles argued, and the king shouted. Sun Tzu stood silent, watching the storm of fear unfold. When the room grew quiet, he said only one thing: then we must not fight where they expect us to fight. A new strategy was born that night. He divided his forces, not to weaken them, but to scatter the enemy's certainty. Small units moved like ghosts through forests and mountains. They cut supply lines, misled scouts, and left false trails. By the time the coalition armies reached Wu's border, they were starving and disoriented. He attacked their unity instead. Through whispers, planted rumors, and staged skirmishes, he turned allies against each other. Mistrust festered like poison. The coalition began to fracture, generals accusing one another of betrayal. In one night, what had been a terrifying army became a battlefield of paranoia. Wu's soldiers struck swiftly, ending what remained. The Three Kingdoms' grand alliance dissolved into smoke. Sun Tzu had won another war without fighting a true war. But this victory was different. It frightened even those in his own court. He moves nations with whispers, one noble said. What if one day he turns those whispers on us? The king smiled at such rumors, but doubt had already been planted. And Sun Tzu, the greatest general of Wu, now faced not just foreign enemies, but the rising fear of his own throne. Part 4. The philosopher of war Sun Tzu's influence was no longer confined to the battlefield. His philosophies began to shape the political and strategic thinking of his time. The rulers of neighboring states became aware of the quiet strategist, whose wisdom could turn even the weakest army into a formidable force. His presence at the court of Wu became a matter of curiosity, fear, and respect. Leaders from rival states sent spies to understand how one man could command such precision. But what they could not grasp was that Sun Tzu's power lay not in brute strength, but in understanding the mind. He knew that wars were not truly won by armies alone, but by controlling the will of both friend and foe. Sun Tzu began teaching select generals the subtleties of deception, timing, and foresight. One of his lessons echoed through time. Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. This was not just a tactic, it was a way of thinking, a lens through which reality itself could be bent. Under his guidance, the kingdom of Wu avoided many costly direct confrontations. Instead of rushing into battles, Wu began setting traps, meticulous plans that disoriented enemies. Rivers, forests, and even fog became tools in their strategic arsenal. Enemy forces often felt victory was within reach, only to find themselves encircled without realizing when it happened. This psychological warfare gave Wu the advantage of winning without excessive bloodshed. Sun Tzu also stressed the value of knowing oneself as much as knowing the enemy. He trained officers not just in combat, but in observation and emotional control. Soldiers began to believe they were part of something larger than themselves, a disciplined machine guided by a brilliant mind. His calm demeanor made him both respected and slightly feared by those around him. Even the king of Wu relied more heavily on Sun Tzu's counsel than on traditional generals. But with influence came enemies within the court. Some nobles envied his rise and whispered about his growing power. Others feared that a strategist so clever could just as easily overthrow as protect. Sun Tzu was aware of these whispers, but remained unmoved. He understood that politics and war were merely different faces of the same struggle. He played the game of appearances with precision, always giving enough credit to others to keep his enemies off balance. During this period, Sun Tzu refined what would later become the foundation of his legendary treatise. His concepts were not mere theories. They were tested through victories and subtle political maneuvers. He began compiling these insights into organized principles. Each principle was born from observation, experience, and clarity of thought. The scrolls were written with the simplicity of truth, not ornamental language. While other commanders boasted of conquest, Sun Tzu spoke of harmony. To him, the ultimate victory was to win without fighting at all. This was a radical idea for the brutal era of constant warfare. Some thought it naive, but Wu's growing dominance proved otherwise. His methods spread quietly, like ripples in still water. Even those who opposed him began adopting fragments of his teachings. A new kind of war had emerged in China, one fought in the mind before the battlefield. His strategies made commanders question their instincts and doubt their own strength. And once doubt took root, defeat often followed. This invisible warfare became Sun Tzu's greatest weapon. As his reputation soared, foreign envoys began arriving at Wu's court. They sought alliances, wisdom, or simply to observe the man who could shape fate with words. Sun Tzu received them politely but revealed little of his secrets. His teachings were meant to serve Wu first and foremost, yet the fame itself added to the aura of invincibility surrounding his homeland. His strategies were not confined to large armies. They could be applied to trade, diplomacy, and even personal rivalries. The court became a living example of strategic balance. Every decision, no matter how small, seemed calculated with uncanny precision. The king of Wu trusted Sun Tzu as both a general and a philosopher. And this trust allowed Wu to shape its destiny with confidence. But Sun Tzu was not blind to the shifting tides. He knew that all power is temporary and that even the mightiest kingdom can fall. He taught the king to avoid arrogance at all costs. Pride, he said, blinds leaders more effectively than any enemy deception. This foresight prevented Wu from overextending its power too soon. His teachings were like a map guiding the kingdom through treacherous waters. While others marched forward recklessly, Wu moved like a shadow, striking only when certain of success. This careful dance frustrated rival states who could neither provoke nor defeat Wu. In Sun Tzu's mind, each step forward was a step in a larger, invisible war. A war that would be remembered far longer than any sword fight. His writings became more structured. Concepts of terrain, momentum, deception, leadership, and adaptability were laid out systematically. He taught that chaos, if understood, could be turned into a weapon. The difference between victory and defeat was often timing, not strength. These principles became immortal, outliving the era itself. As more battles were won through cunning rather than bloodshed, Sun Tzu's legend deepened. To his soldiers, he was a teacher. To his enemies, a phantom. His strategies were so fluid that no single enemy could predict them twice. His influence was no longer just felt, was feared. And fear itself became a weapon. Rival generals began mimicking his style, but without his depth of understanding, Sun Tzu's mastery was not in copying tactics, but in adapting to every situation as if foreseeing the future. This adaptability set him apart from all others. It was this mastery that inspired the phrase supreme art of war. By the time his treatise neared completion, Wu's dominance was undeniable. Kingdoms bowed, not because of the sword, but because of the mind behind it. Sun Tzu had achieved what many kings could not control without conquest. Yet he remained a humble man, more philosopher than conqueror. He understood that the legacy of ideas is greater than any empire, and so, the scrolls that would echo through millennia were born in quiet wisdom. Part 5. The immortal strategist. As Sun Tzu's reputation reached its peak, the kingdom of Wu stood at a crossroads between power and restraint. The king and his advisors urged him to lead an ambitious expansion into rival lands. But Sun Tzu, ever the patient strategist, saw a danger in unchecked conquest. He warned that a kingdom grown too quickly becomes vulnerable at its roots. His counsel was not of glory, but of endurance, for he understood the true cost of empire. War, to Sun Tzu, was not a sport, nor a display of power. It was a tool to secure harmony. He believed that the greatest victories were those where swords never left their sheaths. His wisdom was not always welcomed by the more aggressive generals who craved personal glory. These men, blinded by ambition, whispered that Sun Tzu's cautiousness held Wu back. But the king trusted the strategist, whose foresight had saved them time and time again. Sun Tzu understood human nature deeply, how ambition could blind, how greed could corrode unity. He focused on fortifying Wu's strength from within before chasing distant lands. Roads were built, trade flourished, and soldiers were disciplined into living embodiments of strategy. Every man in the army knew his role, not as a mere fighter, but as a piece in a grand design. The kingdom itself began to mirror Sun Tzu's teachings, fluid, alert, and unshakable. Rival states, watching from afar, grew hesitant to challenge such an organized force. They feared not the number of Wu's soldiers, but the precision with which they moved. Sun Tzu had created something larger than a kingdom. He had built an idea, and ideas, unlike armies, do not die on the battlefield. They linger, evolve, and become immortal. As the years passed, Sun Tzu grew older, though his mind remained sharp as ever. His students, warriors, scholars, and diplomats carried his lessons across the land. Some of them would go on to serve other rulers, spreading his teachings beyond Wu's borders. Without a single campaign of conquest, his influence seeped into enemy courts like smoke through cracks. Entire war strategies were rewritten, not through force, but through the pen. It was a triumph of intellect over steel, something the world had rarely witnessed. Sun Tzu began to step back from active campaigns, preferring to guide from the shadows. His silence became as powerful as his words once were. Soldiers spoke of him with reverence, like a living legend. To them, he was more than a man. He was the embodiment of wisdom itself. At the height of his legacy, Sun Tzu finalized the work that would outlive him. This treatise captured the essence of his life's philosophy: efficiency, deception, adaptability, and clarity. It was more than a manual, for it was a mirror of human behavior. He wrote, not for the warriors of his day, but for generations yet unborn. He believed that understanding conflict was essential to understanding peace. As he sealed the scrolls, he felt a quiet certainty that his words would echo through time. Kings may fall, but ideas endure. Armies may crumble, but wisdom is unbreakable. His work was not a call to endless battle, but a guide to end wars, with minimal bloodshed. This was his true conquest. When rival states attempted one final campaign against Wu, they expected weakness in Sun Tzu's old age. What they encountered instead was a strategy so fluid, so invisible, that their armies collapsed before they even met Wu's forces in open combat. Ambushes, misinformation, and psychological traps shattered the invaders. Sun Tzu had turned the land itself into a weapon. The campaign ended not in a grand battle, but in silent surrender. It was his final masterpiece of war, won without blood. The king of Wu declared a festival in his honor, calling him the protector of the realm. But Sun Tzu remained humble, declining titles and riches. He cared not for gold, only for the power of clarity. In a world of shouting generals, his quiet mind was louder than armies. Time eventually slowed the steps of the great strategist. His beard grew white, and his once commanding voice became soft and deliberate. But even in old age, his presence commanded respect in every corner of the court. Younger generals often came to him with problems, only to find the answers already waiting in his calm gaze. His mind had learned to see war as a flowing river, predictable in its patterns, if one only learned to watch. One evening, as the sun set over the river, Sun Tzu looked upon the capital he helped secure. The walls stood strong, the people prosperous, the kingdom at peace. He knew that no monument could speak louder than this living testament to strategy. His work was complete. And so, the man who conquered without fighting began to fade quietly into legend. After his passing, the treatise he left behind began to travel farther than any soldier could march. Rulers studied it, generals swore by it, and thinkers revered it as a text beyond time. Wars were planned, battles won, and empires shaped using the principles he wrote down centuries earlier. His name became a whisper in war rooms and council halls, invoked not in chaos but in calculated calm. From the east to the far west, his wisdom crossed borders like wind over water. His teachings shaped strategies in lands he had never seen. His scrolls became sacred texts of strategy, valued as much as any sword or spear. Unlike conquerors whose empires crumbled, Sun Tzu's empire was built of words. And that empire has never fallen. It lives on in every strategist who listens more than they speak. Centuries later, as civilizations rose and fell, the wisdom of Sun Tzu continued to guide leaders. It adapted to changing worlds, finding new meaning in new conflicts. His words became a bridge between the past in the future. Even in modern times, his teachings on deception, timing, and control resonate as powerfully as they did in ancient China. The art of war, as he wrote, was eternal. It was less about the battlefield and more about understanding the human spirit. And so, his name became more than history. It became a philosophy, a living force that shaped minds long after the man was gone. In the story of war, Sun Tzu was not just a chapter. He was the author of a timeless truth.